The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune above Eleanor Martinez as she pushed her cart down the marble corridors of Pinnacle Holdings in downtown Chicago. Her weathered hands gripped the handle while her eyes remained fixed ahead, avoiding the gazes that never quite saw her anyway. The morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows cast long shadows across the polished floor she'd scrubbed countless times before. Her navy uniform hung loose on her diminished frame, a stark contrast to the tailored suits that brushed past her without acknowledgement. At 62, Eleanor had learned that invisibility could be both a curse and a blessing. Today she moved through the corporate maze like a ghost, her presence noted only by the gleaming surfaces she left behind. The whispers followed her like smoke. Eleanor's keen ears caught fragments of conversations in 3 different languages. As she emptied wastebaskets and dusted executive desks, the employees of Pinnacle Holdings assumed her silence meant ignorance, her humble position meant simplicity. They spoke freely around her, discussing deals worth millions, personal scandals, and company secrets. Little did they know that the woman they dismissed as just the cleaning lady held advanced degrees in linguistics and international business from Northwestern University. Eleanor had once commanded lecture halls filled with eager students published papers on cross-cultural communication had been somebody. But life has a way of humbling even the most accomplished souls, and now she found solace in the rhythm of her work, the meditation of making things clean and whole again. The young man appeared on a Tuesday morning like a ray of unexpected kindness. Matthew Sullivan, barely 23 with earnest blue eyes and an intern's badge, noticed Eleanor struggling with a particularly heavy trash bin near the elevators. Without being asked, he stepped forward and lifted it for her, offering a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Good morning, Ma'am, I'm Matthew. I don't think we've been properly introduced." Eleanor studied his face, searching for mockery or pity, but found only sincere interest. "Eleanor," she replied softly, her voice carrying the faint accent of her childhood, "in Mexico." From that day forward, Matthew made it his quiet mission to help her whenever their paths crossed, never making a show of it, never drawing attention to his kindness. The corporate machinery of Pinnacle Holdings churned on around them, driven by ambition and quarterly reports. Alexander Blackwood, the company's 30-something CEO, ruled from his glass corner office with the intensity of a man perpetually racing against time. His assistant, Victoria Sterling, managed his impossible schedule with military precision, while CFO David Harrison crunched numbers that determined the fate of thousands of employees. Eleanor observed them all from her position in the shadows, noting their stress levels, their petty rivalries, their human moments of vulnerability when they thought no one was watching. She saw Alexander's hands shake during particularly difficult phone calls, noticed Victoria's tears quickly wiped away after harsh criticism, witnessed David's growing dependence on antacids as pressure mounted. But what truly caught Eleanor's attention was the pattern emerging in their conversations. Whispered meetings, hushed phone calls, documents hastily hidden when she entered rooms to clean. The crisis erupted on a rain-soaked Thursday morning, so that would change everything. Eleanor was methodically cleaning Alexander's office when his phone erupted in a symphony of urgent rings. The young CEO paced frantically, juggling 3 different calls while rain pelted the windows behind him. His face had turned ashen as he screamed into his phone about a collapsed deal with their largest Chinese client, Chen Industries. "They're saying we breached contract. The translation was completely wrong. We're going to lose everything." Alexander's voice cracked with desperation as he hung up one call only to immediately answer another. The international line rang insistently, but Alexander was too consumed by his domestic crisis to notice. Eleanor paused in her dusting, watching this powerful man crumble before her eyes. The phone continued ringing, and something deep within Eleanor stirred, a familiar sensation she hadn't felt in years, the urge to help, to use the skills that had once defined her identity. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the international line. "Wait," she answered in flawless Mandarin, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had once negotiated million-dollar deals in Beijing boardrooms. The voice on the other end belonged to Mr. Chen himself, speaking rapidly about schedule changes and urgent contract modifications. Eleanor listened carefully, taking mental notes, while Alexander stood frozen in shock behind her. She responded with the formal courtesy that Chinese business culture demanded, asking appropriate questions and confirming critical details. When she finally hung up, the office had fallen completely silent, except for the steady drumming of rain against glass. Alexander stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, his mouth slightly agape. You speak Mandarin," he whispered. Eleanor nodded simply. "Among other languages, Mr. Chen moved the meeting to this afternoon. He's bringing new terms, but he's willing to negotiate. The previous translator made several critical errors that you'll need to address immediately." But would Alexander believe that his salvation had been sitting right under his nose, disguised as someone society had taught him to overlook? And what price would Eleanor pay for stepping out of the shadows she had grown comfortable hiding within? The transformation began immediately, though Eleanor felt like she was living someone else's life. Alexander insisted she join him for the crucial meeting with Chen Industries, hastily arranging for a corporate credit card so she could purchase appropriate attire. In the upscale department store, Eleanor caught glimpses of herself in mirrors. The same face, but somehow different, when framed by expensive fabric and professional styling. The sales associate, initially dismissive of Eleanor's appearance, quickly changed her tune when the corporate card was approved without question. Eleanor selected a charcoal grey suit that commanded respect, low heels that wouldn't betray her nervousness, and simple jewelry that spoke of competence rather than ostentation. As she dressed in the store's changing room, Eleanor felt layers of invisibility peeling away like old paint. For the first time in 6 years, she was preparing to be seen, to be heard, to matter again. The boardroom felt different from this side of the polished mahogany table. Eleanor sat across from Mr. Chen and his delegation, noting the subtle body language that indicated their wariness about the previous miscommunications. Alexander introduced her simply as their language specialist, and Eleanor was grateful he didn't elaborate on her usual duties. As the negotiations progressed, Eleanor found herself not just translating words, but bridging cultural gaps that went far deeper than language. She recognized when Mr. Chen's seemingly casual questions were actually testing their commitment, understood the significance of his pauses, knew when to push forward and when to allow space for face-saving compromises. The skills she had honed over decades in academia and international business came flooding back like muscle memory. By the end of the meeting, they had not only salvaged the original deal, but expanded it significantly. The weeks that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of contracts, conference calls, and gradual acceptance. Eleanor found herself with a real office business cards that read International Relations Consultant, and a salary that allowed her to breathe financially for the first time in years. She still arrived early and stayed late, but now it was to prepare presentations rather than empty trash bins. Matthew, now promoted to junior analyst, became her unofficial assistant and truest supporter in the building. "You saved this company," he told her one evening as they reviewed documents for the next day's client meeting. "You saved all our jobs." Eleanor smiled, but privately wondered if she was saving herself or simply trading one form of invisibility for another. The corporate world that had once dismissed her now celebrated her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their acceptance was as conditional as their previous dismissal had been. Victoria Sterling watched Eleanor's rise with barely concealed resentment, making snide comments about sudden promotions and unqualified consultants. During a particularly tense staff meeting about quarterly projections, Victoria openly questioned Eleanor's credentials. "I find it curious that someone with such extensive international experience was working as support staff," she said, her voice dripping with implications. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Eleanor. For a moment, Eleanor felt the familiar urge to shrink, to apologize, to disappear. But then she met Victoria's gaze steadily. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns," Eleanor replied calmly. "The question isn't where someone has been, but what they can contribute now." Alexander cleared his throat and moved the meeting forward, but Eleanor noticed how some colleagues nodded approvingly. while others exchanged meaningful glances. She was walking a tightrope between acceptance and suspicion, and one wrong step could send her tumbling back into the shadows. The evening call from her daughter Sarah shattered Eleanor's newfound confidence like glass against concrete. "Mum, I need you to watch Emma this weekend. David and I are going to Napa for our anniversary." Eleanor clutched the phone, fighting back tears, as her daughter's voice carried the same dismissive tone it had held for months. "Sarah, I have a business dinner on Friday night. It's important for—" "More important than your granddaughter," Sarah interrupted. "Look, I know you got some kind of promotion or whatever, but Emma needs her grandmother. Don't let this job go to your head." The line went dead, leaving Eleanor staring at her reflection in her office window. Outside, Chicago's skyline glittered with ambition and possibility, but inside, Eleanor felt the familiar ache of being reduced to her usefulness rather than valued for her worth. She had climbed from janitor to consultant, but to her own daughter, she was still just the backup babysitter, the woman who had messed up her first career and couldn't be trusted not to mess up again. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, successful in your career, but still seeking validation from those who matter most? Share your experience in the comments below. The anonymous letter arrived on a grey Monday morning, its unmarked envelope containing words that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "Your husband Robert is back in Chicago. He's been cleared of all charges and wants to meet." Eleanor's hands shook as she read the typed message, memories flooding back like a broken dam. Robert Martinez had been her partner in both marriage and career until his gambling addiction and embezzlement of university funds had destroyed everything they'd built together. He had fled the country, leaving Eleanor to face the music alone. Lost job, frozen assets, criminal investigation that eventually cleared her, but destroyed her reputation anyway. She had loved him, trusted him, and paid the price for his betrayals. Now, according to the letter, he was back and looking for her. Eleanor crumpled the paper, then smoothed it out again, reading it once more to make sure she hadn't imagined it. Her past, which she had worked so hard to outrun, had finally caught up with her. Alexander found her that afternoon staring out her office window at the busy street below. "Eleanor, are you all right? You seem distracted." She turned to face him, this young man who had given her a second chance, and felt the weight of secrets pressing down upon her. "Someone from my past has reappeared," she said carefully. "Someone who caused me a great deal of trouble years ago." Alexander settled into the chair across from her desk. "Do you want to talk about it?" The kindness in his voice nearly broke her resolve to keep her personal life separate from her professional one. "My former husband embezzled funds from the university where we both worked. He disappeared, and I was left to deal with the aftermath. Lost my job, my reputation, everything. That's how I ended up cleaning offices instead of teaching in them." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "Is he dangerous?" Eleanor considered the question. "Not physically, but Robert has a gift for manipulation, for making other people pay for his mistakes. If he's back, he wants something." But what could Robert possibly want from Eleanor now? And would his return destroy the fragile new life she had built from the ashes of their shared destruction? The reunion took place in the sterile environment of a downtown coffee shop, neutral, ground that felt anything but safe. Robert Martinez looked older, grayer, but still carried himself with the easy charm that had once made Eleanor believe in fairy tales. He wore an expensive suit and a practiced smile, extending his hand as if they were old friends rather than former spouses whose marriage had ended in betrayal and ruin. "Eleanor, you look wonderful. Success suits you." His voice carried the same smooth cadence that had once convinced her to co-sign loans, to trust him with joint accounts, to believe his promises about getting help for his gambling. Eleanor kept her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, refusing to accept his offered handshake. "What do you want, Robert?" The directness of her question seemed to surprise him, as if he expected the same accommodating woman he had left behind 6 years ago. Robert's proposal was as audacious as it was insulting. He claimed to have evidence that Victoria Sterling was embezzling funds from Pinnacle Holdings, funneling money to offshore accounts through a complex network of shell companies. "I've been investigating corporate fraud cases," he explained smoothly. It's my specialty now. I could help you expose her, save your company millions. Eleanor studied his face, looking for the tells she had learned to recognize during their marriage. The slight twitch near his left eye, the way his fingers drummed against surfaces when he was constructing elaborate lies. "And what would you want in return for this help?" she asked. Robert's smile widened. "A consulting fee, naturally, and perhaps a chance to rebuild what we once had together." Eleanor felt nauseous. The man who had destroyed her life was now proposing to save her career, all while suggesting they could somehow resurrect their failed marriage. "You have 30 seconds to show me this evidence," she said coldly. "Then I'm leaving." The documents Robert produced were extensive, and Eleanor had to admit compelling. Bank records, email communications, transaction histories. If authentic, they painted a picture of systematic theft that had been going on for over 2 years. Victoria had apparently been skimming from client accounts, manipulating exchange rates on international transfers, and creating false vendors to generate fraudulent invoices. Eleanor examined the papers with the analytical skills that had once made her a respected academic researcher. The evidence seemed solid, but she knew Robert's talent for fabrication. "Where did you get these?" she demanded. Robert's expression grew serious. "I have contacts in forensic accounting, people who owe me favors from my previous troubles. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Eleanor felt trapped between her desire to protect Pinnacle Holdings and her certainty that trusting Robert would lead to disaster. Every instinct screamed warnings, but the potential damage to the company and to innocent employees like Matthew demanded action. Eleanor made her choice with the cold calculation of someone who had learned to separate emotion from necessity. She would use Robert's information, but on her terms, with safeguards he couldn't manipulate. That evening she presented the evidence to Alexander in his office, explaining its source without sugarcoating her history with Robert. "He's not trustworthy," she said bluntly, "but if Victoria is stealing from the company, we need to stop her." Alexander studied the documents, his expression growing increasingly grave. "If this is accurate, she's taken nearly $3 million over the past 18 months. Eleanor nodded. "I suggest we bring in an independent forensic accountant to verify everything before we act, and we should involve the FBI's white-collar crime division from the beginning." Alexander looked at her with new respect. "You've thought this through carefully." Eleanor managed a bitter smile. "I've been on the receiving end of financial fraud, Alexander. I know how destructive it can be when handled improperly." The investigation moved swiftly once federal authorities became involved. Eleanor found herself working closely with FBI, forensic accountants translating documents and explaining the complex international transactions that Victoria had used to hide her theft. The evidence was damning. Victoria had been stealing systematically, using her position as CFO to manipulate records and create false documentation. When confronted, Victoria initially tried to blame subordinates, then attempted to negotiate a deal. Finally faced with overwhelming evidence, she broke down and confessed. The arrest made local news. Pinnacle Holdings CFO charged with embezzlement. Eleanor watched the coverage from her office, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but she couldn't forget that her own return to prominence had come at the cost of someone else's downfall, facilitated by a man she couldn't trust. The board meeting that followed Victoria's arrest felt like a trial where Eleanor was both witness and defendant. Pinnacle Holdings directors sat around the polished conference table, their faces grave as they discussed the company's future in the wake of the scandal. Alexander presented Eleanor's role in uncovering the fraud, praising her diligence and expertise. But Eleanor could feel the unspoken questions hanging in the air like smoke. Board member Patricia Westbrook finally voiced what others were thinking. "Ms. Martinez, we're grateful for your service to the company, but given your unique background, some of us have concerns about placing too much trust in someone whose past includes financial irregularities." Eleanor felt the familiar burn of injustice, the weight of being judged by her association with Robert's crimes, rather than her own actions. "Mrs. Westbrook, I was cleared of all wrongdoing in my previous situation. My record at Pinnacle Holdings speaks for itself. Chairman Harold Pinnacle, the company's elderly founder, had remained silent throughout the discussion. Now he leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped on the table. "Ms. Martinez, I've reviewed your work over the past several months. You've saved this company from multiple disasters, recovered millions in potential losses, and demonstrated loyalty, under circumstances that would have broken lesser people." He paused, looking around the table at his fellow board members. "I propose we offer Ms. Martinez a permanent position as Director of International Relations, with full benefits and a seat on our advisory board." The room fell silent. Eleanor felt her heart racing, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. Patricia Westbrook looked as if she had swallowed something unpleasant, but she nodded reluctantly. "If that's your recommendation, Harold." One by one, the other board members voiced their agreement. Eleanor had gone from janitor to director in less than a year, but the victory felt hollow without her family's recognition of her achievement. But Victoria Sterling was not finished with Eleanor Martinez. From her jail cell awaiting trial, Victoria filed a federal lawsuit, alleging that Eleanor had orchestrated the entire scandal to eliminate competition and secure her own promotion. The lawsuit claimed Eleanor had used her relationship with Robert to manufacture evidence, had manipulated Alexander's trust, and had violated multiple employment laws in her rise through the company. The local media picked up the story with enthusiasm. Janitorto executive sued by former CFO. Eleanor watched, her hard-won reputation crumble in real time, as news outlets painted her as either a victim or a villain depending on their editorial perspective. The Pinnacle Holdings board, spooked by the negative publicity, placed Eleanor on administrative leave pending the resolution of the lawsuit. Once again, Eleanor found herself fighting for her professional life, armed with nothing but the truth and the support of those who truly knew her character. The courtroom was packed on the day Victoria's lawsuit went to trial. Eleanor sat at the defendant's table in her best suit, trying to project confidence while her stomach churned with anxiety. Victoria's lawyer painted a picture of Eleanor as a master manipulator who had used her position as a cleaning lady to gather intelligence, then leveraged her relationship with a known criminal to frame an innocent woman. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the lawyer proclaimed, "this is a case about deception about a woman who literally cleaned up by destroying others." Eleanor's attorney countered with financial records testimony from FBI investigators and character witnesses who spoke to Eleanor's integrity. But as the days wore on, Eleanor could see doubt creeping into some jurors' faces. The narrative of the scheming janitor was simpler, more dramatic than the complex truth of corporate fraud and personal redemption. Then Matthew Sullivan asked to testify. The young man who had once helped Eleanor carry her cleaning cart now sat in the witness box wearing his best suit, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. "Your Honor, I worked alongside Ms. Martinez for months before anyone knew about her background. I watched her work, really work, at a job that offered her no recognition, no advancement, no hope of anything better. She never complained, never asked for special treatment, never acted like she was above the work she was doing." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "But more than that, she was the first person in that building who saw me as more than just an intern. She encouraged me to speak up in meetings, helped me understand the business, treated me like I mattered. If Ms. Martinez wanted to manipulate people for personal gain, why would she waste time on someone who couldn't help her career?" The courtroom was completely silent as Matthew finished his testimony. "Your Honor, if anyone in that building deserves respect and trust, it's Eleanor Martinez. She didn't climb over other people to get where she is. She lifted them up along the way." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a unanimous verdict in Eleanor's favor. Victoria's lawsuit was dismissed, and the judge awarded Eleanor substantial damages for defamation and emotional distress. But the victory that mattered most came after the trial, when Sarah finally called her mother. "Mom, I saw the news coverage. I had no idea what you'd been going through, what you'd accomplished. I'm sorry I didn't believe in you." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling tears of relief and forgiveness. "You don't need to apologize, Mija. You just need to let me be your mother again, not just Emma's babysitter." For the first time in years, Sarah laughed, really laughed, and Eleanor felt the last piece of her heart clicking back into place. The Pinnacle Holdings board formally reinstated Eleanor with a promotion to Vice President of International Relations, but even that paled in comparison to hearing her daughter say, "I'm proud of you, Mom. I always have been, even when I was too stubborn to show it." 6 months later, Eleanor stood before a packed auditorium at Northwestern University, delivering the commencement address to graduating business students. She wore her academic robes for the first time in 7 years, but now they carried the weight of hard-won wisdom rather than theoretical knowledge. You will face moments in your careers when the world tells you that you are invisible, that your voice doesn't matter, that your best days are behind you, she told the eager young faces before her. In those moments, remember that your worth is not determined by other people's recognition. Your value is not diminished by temporary setbacks or others' failure to see your potential. She paused, thinking of all the hands that had helped her climb out of the shadows. Matthew's quiet kindness, Alexander's willingness to take a chance, even Robert's unintentional push toward truth. Success is not about proving you belong in spaces that once excluded you. It's about using your unique perspective to make those spaces better for everyone who comes after you. Eleanor's story became legendary within Pinnacle Holdings and beyond, shared in business schools and leadership seminars as an example of resilience and the hidden potential that exists in every workplace. The company she had once cleaned became a model for employee development and second chances, with Eleanor heading a program that identified and promoted overlooked talent throughout the organization. Matthew, now a senior analyst, often joked that he had learned more about leadership from watching Eleanor push a mop cart than from any MBA program. But for Eleanor, the greatest victory was not the corner office or the executive salary or the industry recognition. It was the knowledge that she had remained true to herself through the darkest times, that she had chosen courage over comfort, truth over convenience, and service over self-interest. The girl who had once dreamed of changing the world through words had become the woman who changed it through example, proving that dignity and worth cannot be taken away by circumstances, only surrendered by choice. The morning sun streamed through Eleanor's office windows as she prepared for another day of bridging cultures and building understanding across language barriers. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed, not by success, but by the journey that had led to it. The scars remained, but they had become sources of strength rather than shame. Eleanor Martinez had learned that being seen and being valuable were two different things, that respect earned through adversity carried more weight than acclaim given freely, and that sometimes the most important conversations happen in languages the heart understands even when the mind struggles to translate. She had been invisible, dismissed and discarded, but she had never been defeated. And in a world that often overlooks its most valuable assets, Eleanor's story served as a reminder that extraordinary potential can be found in the most ordinary places, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to look beyond the surface and recognize the light that has always been there, steady and true, ready to illuminate the path forward for anyone willing to follow. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.